unit level, the extent to which the unit tests have covered the code that has been written, right? And that at the system level, if you're looking at black box tests, it allows us to measure the extent to which the black box tests exercise the code and identify gaps in that. If it's used appropriately, I think, in a mix of metrics that measure other process, project, and product priorities, then you're less likely to get some sort of fetishization of the code coverage metrics or undesirable behavior distortion of the code coverage metrics. But I concede your point that, like any metric, if you have that metric and that metric alone, you're going to get some really weird behavior out of it. So I think it is important, if you're going to think about introducing this metric, starting to use it, that you do consider those aspects, Tom. I have not seen a whole lot of distortion with behavior with the clients that I've worked with on use of code coverage, but that was because we already had other metrics in place that told us a lot of interesting things, and so this was, we were able to keep the code coverage metric in context, but I can see how it could get out of hand, right? I mean, there was a discussion about code coverage metrics and the software test and performance online, I think, about good versus bad of code coverage and what code coverage told you, and there were some comments about whether code coverage was a good surrogate metric for confidence, and how much confidence should we have in the system. And I would say no. It's really not a good metric to look at to measure the confidence in the system, because, as I said, the unit tests top out at about 50% defect removal effectiveness. So even if you're doing spectacularly good unit testing and you're getting great code coverage with your unit testing, and if that's all you're doing, then 50% of the bugs could easily be slipping past you. So it's a fairly poor metric for how much confidence should I have in the system, unless it's used as part of a number of other metrics. I hope I answered your question there, Tom. It's a huge question, and one that could be an entire presentation on its own. Just this whole how metrics make people do bad things sometimes. But I was more interested in the talking about how the tools or how the metrics are used in this presentation, and what they couldn't do, rather than all of the different ways they could go awry. Okay, question from Tim here. Another question from Tim. Good one. Collecting coverage from manual testing or some automated testing, there need to be multiple test runs, and that's certainly true. We've had some problems trying to combine coverage data from separate test runs. Any tips on this? Interesting. The tools that I have used have been able to do that, have been able to merge the results from multiple runs. So there's a single database where the probe entries are being stored, and they are able to keep track of what's happening incrementally. Though I would suspect that if the code were to change, then that would create a problem, because then the tool might not be able to cross-reference what was new versus what was old, and thus it wouldn't necessarily be able to figure out how to transfer over the coverage results from one run to the next. Some of the commercial tools might help with this, but I think that's a pretty complicated problem. Of now you've got some sort of version control, or at least smart comparison going on in the code coverage tool when it's instrumenting to say, hey, well, have I seen this before or not? Yeah, so I would imagine that when you start talking about multiple runs against changing code, that then you get into some challenges with that. Not real sure how you'd do it other than some sort of manual process at that point. A comment from Tom here. Thanks, Rex. Good points you made answering my question. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad I was able to answer that. It's as a guy who spends a lot of time doing management consulting as well as technical kinds of issues, that is one of the more fascinating things is metrics and the distortion of behavior. Lee Copeland. Hey, Lee, how you doing? Good to see you here. Regarding coverage, high percentages don't necessarily give me confidence. However, low numbers frighten me. That is an excellent point, Lee. Thank you for making it. Yes. While high percentage code coverage percentages do not necessarily tell you that you've found a lot of bugs, or even that you found most of the bugs, if you haven't touched the code, you most certainly haven't found the bugs in it. So, this is back to the principle of testing that says that the testing can show the presence of defects and not prove their absence. So we should be careful in assuming that just because we've covered code that we found the bugs in it, but at the same time we can definitely assume, as Lee's comment points out, that if you haven't tested the code, you certainly have not found the bugs in it. And so that is the one way that coverage measurements can be good at helping you not have false confidence, which is certainly of a great deal of value. There's a question from Shmuel. He says, thanks for the great presentation. Thank you for enjoying it, Shmuel. I'm glad you were able to make it. Says, curious question, what is the statue on the cover slide and how is it related to the material? The statue on the cover side is a photograph that I took in Prague of it's a legendary figure in Prague. It's called the Prague Golem. And basically it's a story from the 1700s or 1600s there was a rabbi in Prague who had a large congregation, I guess you could say, a large group of Jewish people that he was serving, and he was very busy, and he couldn't keep on top of all of their needs, and so he created this thing out of clay and breathed life into it somehow or another, and he had it do stuff for him, useful stuff, but at one point the golem got confused and basically ran amok and started breaking things and hurting people. And so the rabbi had to destroy it. And the relationship there with the presentation is, for one thing, this kind of gets to Tom's point about, could these run amok on us? Could these metrics run amok on us? Yes, they could. But it also is kind of a reference to the, it's too hard to do this all by yourself. You're going to need a tool, but beware of the tool because the tool could run amok on you in a few ways. Let's see, got a question from John Hagar. Good to see you, John. I hope you're doing well. Is it worth the effort to mix coverage of the code during black box testing? Well, yeah, I like to do that. I think that it is worth periodically, if you can run through all of your tests. For example, you've got automated tests, to produce an instrumented version of your code and then run your black box tests against it and check to see what level of coverage you're achieving, because this will tend to be a pretty low number, to be honest with you. And then at that point you can use your knowledge of the gaps of your code coverage to enhance your tests, and I think that is a worthwhile exercise. Let's see, one last comment here. I want to share one from Lee, which is a good comment. He said, I worked on a project once where we found very low coverage at the unit test level. When we informed the developers and their managers, they dealt with the problem like this. They quit giving us the code so we could measure the coverage. Yeah, I think that's, this is one of the examples of distortion of behavior in an undesirable way in response to a metric. And that, that could certainly happen of, if I don't see it, it isn't there. If I don't see it, it's not a problem. So there is a political element to getting this stuff accepted, and you do need to address that for sure. Well, that was a great Q&A session. I really appreciate everybody's participation. We